if someone does it day in and day out and they're explaining it to somebody who doesn't know anything about it, that person might not have a clue what they're talking about. So having that ability to understand the audience and know how to bring the topics up and talk them through them has been, I think, part of our success, and why schools like working with us is we have that ability to help them understand the process along the way.
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales.
Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Bradley Hartman. This podcast, we bring you ideas and insights from construction leaders across the country every single week to help you lead more effectively. This episode is brought to you by the Simple Sales Pipeline. If your sales team and business development is not consistently and with discipline forecasting your near-term sales opportunities, you, my friend, are flying blind. It is sales and leadership malpractice. So how do we solve it? Should you run out and get a big CRM, spend 6 figures and take 2 years to implement it only to find out people aren't even using it? No, of course not. Don't do that. That'd be stupid. You can solve this problem immediately within 30 minutes with the Simple Sales Pipeline. Learn more at thesimpleSalesPipeline.com. I'm excited to bring to you today my conversation with Mr. Jared Yando. That's right, Yando, Y-A-N-D-O, which if I have a list, which I may or may not have, of the top last names of all the guests I've ever had on the show, this would be in the top 25. But I may or may not have that list. Jared Yando is the Senior Project Manager at Schoolhouse Construction Services. They specialize in New York State school capital improvement projects. What does that mean? K through 12 schools. That's what they specialize in. So they work with school boards and academics, which must be some of the most challenging customers to have. Very strong-willed people who have their own little fiefdom, who may or may not know anything about construction. But Jared goes into how they work alongside these customers and make it easier for them for these capital improvement projects to schools in a very, very narrow window of time, generally one summer. Jared is a product of the SUNY, S-U-N-Y, State University of New York school system. He got his Associates of Applied Science and Construction Technology at State University of New York at Delhi. He then got his Bachelor of Science in Construction Management at the State University of New York College of Environmental Sciences and Forestry. We need an acronym right there really, really badly. I'll come up with it. And then he got his Master's of Science in Curriculum Development and Instructional Technology from the University of Albany. He got out of school. He started working for a really large and professional GC, Whiting Turner Contracting Company. As you will hear soon after, he was drawn back into the classroom. He ultimately became a full professor with tenure and then left. That's right. This is like the dream of everyone who is an academic. Get a full professorship and get tenure. You are set for life. You're on easy street. You can use the same PowerPoint you have now for the next 50 years. It's the dream. He left, got back into construction management full time, and that's part of the story that we're going to tell here today. So without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Mr. Jared Yando, Senior PM at Schoolhouse Construction Services in upstate New York. As always, thank you for listening. Mr. Jared Yando, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Bradley. Appreciate it.
I've been badgering you for like 6 or 7 years to be on the show. So I'm glad you finally caved and just said, fine, I'll be on. Just leave me alone. I'm in.
From the speakeasies in Denver, Colorado to here today. You know?
That was a good time. I forgot about that. That was the speakeasies of Denver. Took a while to find it, but we got it. So let's jump right in. I want to learn a little bit about your background so we bring you up to speed with our audience. Jared Yando, circa 12 years old, You're in 6th grade. Geographically, tell me where you were and what did you think you might be doing in the future? Maybe not specifically to 2023, but what do you think you were going to grow up to do?
Oh, that's a good one. So, 12 years old, I grew up in very northern New York called the North Country, right on the Canadian border. You'll probably hear some Canadian accent mixed in with my New York accent here. I grew up in a family of grocers, independent grocery store owners. Yeah.
Oh, what a brutal industry.
Yeah, it is now. It was lucrative at one point, and it it bid my family very well for years. But it's a lot harder nowadays. But so at first, I thought I was getting into that. My grandfather on my mother's side was a Canadian. My mom's Canadian, so half Canadian. But he was a residential and light commercial builder in Montreal, Quebec, actually. So I saw that side of that. And then my grandfather, even though he was in the grocery business, was big into woodworking. So I think at 12, I actually started getting into this groove of liking construction, design, engineering. I didn't know what I wanted to do until high school. I had an opportunity to shadow a construction manager doing a school renovation project at my school. I thought I was going into architecture. Sat with him for 2 years, afternoons, my junior and senior year of high school. I got to go to the job trailer, sit with him, check out what he did. And I was like, I want to do this. I didn't even know it existed. I didn't even know construction management was a thing. Guidance counselors told you if you don't want to physically build, you got to be an engineer or an architect. And I didn't know there was this middle ground between the trades and the design side. So I found that, luckily, through chance. And that's when I tracked into college, studying and going in the path of construction management.
Wow. So,
yeah,
I mean, talk about, and I'll ask you if you kind of foresaw where you end up here, but so you're in school, I'm assuming, a good student. You have this opportunity to shadow. You realize that this guy is building, constructing in a school while this is happening. Then you get into academia, you teach it, and now you end up to a place that is literally called Schoolhouse Construction Services.
Schoolhouse Construction. Yeah. No, I didn't think I would ever honestly fall back into the school construction world. I was always interested in more of the large scale commercial, industrial, infrastructure type work. That I loved home building and I loved the residential side, but I'm more like, looking up in the air and seeing these buildings. And I was like, wow, I want to get into this stuff, building with metal, and some cool different products and concrete. And that's the path I kind of took. So I saw myself going into the construction industry, but more so on heavy commercial type, and which I did after college. I did start with Whiting Turner,
right,
and working for them. So the academia path led me back to the school path because I was very fortunate when I started in academia to teach at a school that was not a research institution. And they told me in my interview, we're okay with you still consulting in the industry and working. And so the only thing that really fit that path was I found construction management firms that were renovating K through 12 schools, which occurred during the summers when I was off from teaching.
Right.
So that was my path back to working in schools.
So I want to ask you this, because I think you had a high school version, which is it's brilliant. And right now, my local high school, where we're a mile away, I have a 15-year-old who's a sophomore there. They've been having ongoing construction, I think, for the last year and a half. So 2 summers and then 1 full, maybe even more than that, school year. So, and every time I drop off my kid, I'm like, these poor suckers, dude, just all these kids with shaggy hair, blocking their vision, staring at their phone. I'm like, this is just an injury waiting to happen. But I was wondering how you got this opportunity. How did this come on the radar where someone said, young Jared, you might be interested in this. And look, there's construction going on right here. Why don't we pair you up? Were you just 1 out of 100, or was this some sort of system? Because it's brilliant.
It was luck. It was connections. The connection part's funny. So my mother was the guidance counselor secretary at my high school. Okay. So
all right.
The construction project management firm that was doing this project came into the school and said to my mother, is there any students you think that would be interested in shadowing our construction manager, someone who's interested in architecture and engineering. And my mom perked right up and she's like, my son, he loves that. But obviously the school did their due diligence and guidance counselors put their heads together and nobody actually really stepped up to want to do it. So while some would say my mother got me the job, I'll thank you, Mom. But it obviously did assist. And that is how it happened. Now, I commend the company's name was Betty and Kring. I commend them for doing what they did. They had a previous teacher working for them, kind of doing construction administration, that gave them the idea. It's something we've actually brought to our clients and we've been willing to start trying to do with schools now is get kind of a shadowing program started back up. And, if we're there working at that school, like it was for me, it was easy. I walked out from the building, across the parking lot into the job trailer. It was perfect.
Yeah. Well, it was funny. I was at the safety symposium in Houston and Texas A&M and UT Austin, and a bunch of GCs were there. And we were talking about real world experience and seeing what's going on. And obviously in College Station and Austin, there's construction everywhere. And someone asked the GC, like, hey, seems like we're talking about students, getting them more involved during construction, seeing what it's really like and understanding safety. Are you generally willing to do that? And an administrator jumped in and said, yeah, they are at 4:00 on Friday when no one's there, because our students are a pain in the ass and a risk. And I think it's easy to say, no, absolutely. Everybody should do this. Great idea. What do I want this to do this on my project? I do not. Construction's hard enough as it is. So how have you guys been able to overcome that at Schoolhouse to start implementing that? Or how have you reframed your thinking about it, understanding you are adding more complexity to a somewhat complex construction project to begin with?
So I think you have to dive into what the project entails, what type of construction's going on, when is it happening, when to put the hard hat on the student and bring them onto site. We're dealing with K through 12 construction. A lot of it's renovations. So many of the renovations a little simpler, a little less risk, a little less craziness. Big style additions where we got cranes going on, steel being swung, things like that. We're obviously going to have to tread a little differently with the student. But, getting them in the job trailer, letting them see the interactions with the engineers, the architects, looking at drawings, looking at plans. I mean, I commend my 2-year experience on my ability once I got to college to understand construction documents just on this project manager I shadowed, handing me a set of drawings and giving me a few pointers and telling me to understand the lingo, the language. And I think even that's a big help. The amount of students that struggle when I was teaching with understanding drawing specifications. So if we can get them in there early to start looking at these kind of things, I think it's going to be a big help.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll jump to the students here in a minute, because I do want to talk about your role, how you transitioned back from industry back into the classroom and did both. Let's talk about your customer base, because when I think about your customers, who may or may not include school boards and academics who don't know much about building, and I don't want to denigrate these folks, it's not their area of expertise, but what they sure as hell know is when school starts and when it ends, and there's this narrow period where we need to get a lot of work done. This seems like the most frustrating, stress inducing job in construction. So tell me a little bit about how you frame that. Obviously you love it. You're great at it.
Yeah.
How do you bring these things together to really make this sort of construction attractive?
So New York is unique. New York adopted long ago a law. It's actually a law called Wick's Law, which was a law based on more allowing equal competitiveness between contractors. So they require on any state-funded municipal projects in New York State, they have to have multiple prime contracts. A prime contract in general construction, HVAC, plumbing, and electrical at minimum. So you'll have 4 contracts direct with the owner. So if a school goes out and bids a project, they're going to have a separate contract with each one of those entities. Sometimes you'll have a site contract, roofing contract. So now you have all these players and they're not under one entity. There's no GC managing them. There's nobody managing them. So you have the GC thinking they're going to go over here and the electrical is going to start over here, and nobody's getting them to play in the sandbox and do things. So for years, honestly, in New York, it's been a battle with these municipal projects. Things were taking too long, and a lot of construction management firms jumped on this. And years ago, the promotion of these schools and municipalities hiring construction managers as owner representatives to kind of get everybody to play in the sandbox, come up with a plan, and execute that plan and work with them to continue. That's how the need for us was born. And we took it to another level where our company is fairly new. We started in 2014, but we started in 2014 for the sole purpose of K through 12 school construction. We saw a lot of large scale construction management firms, general contractors doing this job. And we said, we want to just do this. We don't want to have general contracting on the side. We want to just manage and assist schools. We can get a knack for this and what the ins and outs are with the state education department, New York. That's how we got to where we are. New York's policies kind of make it so the state needs this kind of help. So that's where we've gotten our niche, and it's done very well for us. We're across the state, mostly in northern New York, up by the Canadian border in the Adirondacks. I always use Lake Placid as a good reference point. We surround that area pretty well. Down into Albany, the capital region of New York State. Saratoga, many people know the racetrack, the chips, the water, that region we're in. And then our home base is in what most people know as the Catskill Mountains,
okay,
not far from Cooperstown, the Baseball Hall of Fame. So that is our third territory. We are not really down towards the city in Westchester, Dutchess, Rockland counties. We're not in there as of yet, and we're not out west. So we're not out towards Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo as of yet. So, but there's a lot of schools in New York. As we all know, it's a very populous state. So there are a lot of K through 12 schools. A lot were built a long time ago, and a lot need a lot of help. So,
yeah, as you were talking, kind of that focus of just zeroing in and say, we're going to make a trade-off and not going after all this other type of work that in theory we could do. I know you could do that extremely well. We're really going to focus here. And there's a phrase, there's riches in niches, and being really known as experts here when obviously there is risk. So tell me about coordinating with school boards and academics who may or may not have a high degree of understanding about construction, because some of these schools, probably the last construction job they did was 40 years ago and they weren't there.
Yeah.
How do you lead them and reassure them of the process, even though when obviously we know construction, sometimes there's surprises and challenges along the way?
Yeah, it's funny. The owner and president of our company, Eric Robert, Eric was an academic at Delhi, became an academic dean. I worked under him as a professor, and actually had him as a professor my first year as a student. So it's kind of funny the tie-in with Eric and I. But being an academic has, I feel, helped us significantly because we taught the concepts of construction and construction management. And being able to go to school administrators and school boards who may not know a lot about construction, we're able to bring the conversation down to a level that we can communicate with and they can understand the processes. As you know, in any industry, if someone does it day in and day out and they're explaining it to somebody who doesn't know anything about it, that person might not have a clue what they're talking about. So having that ability to understand the audience and know how to bring the topics up and talk them through them has been, I think, part of our success and why schools like working with us is we have that ability to help them understand the process along the way.
Yeah, well, I can imagine too, is for professors, I think of this, I've got a 11-year-old who's in 5th grade, is absolute respect for what they do because I cannot imagine me doing it. And I think, yes, there's differences between K through 12 and an entry-level class on site safety management. It's still being in the classroom, working with young adults and the challenges that come with that. And I think when I didn't realize Eric, but obviously you understand your background, you can say, hey, I've walked a mile in your shoes. Actually, I've done this for a while, a little bit different, but generally the same thing. I can only imagine that really enhances the credibility.
Yeah. And they are so busy, especially nowadays. I mean, I can't even imagine being school administrators through the COVID, through pandemic, and every turn you make and every decision you make is going to get scrutinized. And it seems to be the way the country is. We scrutinize everything. I'm guilty of it, but, they don't need the headache of having to then worry about their construction project. They need somebody that they can entrust on managing it for them and coming to them and telling them where there's an issue and when they need help. They don't need to have that added stress level to them. And that's everybody. That's not just the administrators. That's the teachers. That's the students. We have to make sure these projects are ran smoothly. So there is no worries. And unfortunately, obviously things happen on every project that, you know, someone's using a jackhammer when they're not supposed to be outside of a window where a regent's
Right.
exam is going on.
Yes.
But it's been a great niche to be in. That's kind of why I chose. Eric's done a great job building the company, and I've been working with him, like I mentioned earlier, in the summers while I was teaching, and things were growing and conversations were had between him and I, and it was a tough decision, but to leave academia. But I'm glad I did, because I'm still technically teaching to an extent. So
Yeah.
It's been fun.
Different audience for sure. Tell me about your transition or the attraction that had you working full time and to draw you back in the classroom, because I think there's just a real opportunity, and I think it's going to take a lot of people thinking differently, but I know a lot of really talented people who are in construction that, given the right opportunity, maybe it's only a couple hours, maybe it starts with a guest lecture, would absolutely love and probably do it for free to go to their alma mater or the local university and give back and teach what they know. Inevitably, they get more energy from it. They learn from the students. And with us, we have a little niche here with our construction Spanish and safety Spanish programs at Oklahoma and Oklahoma State and Texas A&M and Texas State. I absolutely love going in that classroom. However, I'm there for a limited amount of time. I describe myself as the fun uncle. I come in, we have some fun, and then I'm like, all right, the real work begins for you guys, and I leave. But are there ways that we can replicate what you've been able to do, of get really talented younger leaders to come in and give some or part of their time to the next generation of CM leaders?
Absolutely. I was fortunate. I stayed in contact with my professors after school and when I started in the industry, and the way I got engaged and started with kind of a quasi desire to eventually do it. Granted, I thought I was going to do it at the end of my career. I never thought I would teach towards the beginning of my career, but I got involved in an advisory board at the school, and I started going to advisory board meetings, getting involved in that sense, and then having those guest lectures where I'd go in and talk to some students briefly, and it gave me a little taste. And the professors had a job opening. One of my professors that I had was retiring, and they approached me. And at the time, honestly, I was fresh out. I would call myself fresh out. I was only 2 years into the industry when I got the call to possibly come and teach, which is crazy.
That is crazy.
Why would they want me at 2 years out? But they called me and they enjoyed me as a student. I was lucky. I wasn't a perfect student by any means, but they had seen me in front of the classroom as a guest presenter. And they had seen my experience. I was fortunate. I was building semiconductor plants for IBM at the time, which was pretty crazy construction, pretty expensive, seeing all kinds of stuff. So they knew I had a pretty vast knowledge in all areas. So I blew them off like 3 or 4 times. They continued to call me. And one of my best friends actually was the reason why I decided to do it. He said, "You're an idiot if you don't try it, because you can always go back." And I was like, you know what? Why not? Let's try it. And that's how I started. But for those thinking about it, I think, Bradley, one of the biggest things that some people get scared about is the PhD situation.
Sure.
Which I always questioned. But I went to a technology school that didn't require a PhD as part of my hiring process. We were a 2-year program and a 4-year program combined. So the 2-year program was the first 2 years of the 4-year program, but you can get an AAS degree after the first 2 years. So I got hired in with a bachelor's degree, teaching the majority of my contact hours in the 2-year program until I obtained a master's. I was able to teach into the bachelor's program more.
Okay.
And we didn't have a master's degree at SUNY Delhi, at the State University of New York at Delhi. But there are schools out there similar to Delhi that have that. And I would encourage those who don't have the desire to get that degree to look into those type of schools. But I would encourage universities in areas like construction management and some others to step back and breathe and look at the necessity of a PhD, and is it crucial? I mean, those that are out there that have bachelor's degrees and 10 plus years experience in the industry could be phenomenal teachers for you that have that experience that goes beyond. And I'm not saying there isn't a place for PhDs. It's hard work to get to that level. We need research in our industry. That type of PhD is significantly needed, and I do not discourage that path at all either, but I think we need to look at the other path and allowing those without PhDs. For me, that was part of my reason I wanted to possibly go elsewhere in academia, and I was fully tenured, and I made full professor in the State University of New York, and at a young age, which was kind of unheard of. And everybody would say, you had it made. Why the hell did you get out of it? But I couldn't really go anywhere without going to that next level, getting that PhD. I did have opportunities to go the route of administration, but there would have been pressure there to get obviously PhDs in higher education administration. And I didn't want to take that route. I felt having the knowledge I had, continually working in the industry, that was my PhD. I mean, Get out there and they should contact their alma mater, get involved in an industry board level. It gets you in, it helps you recruiting wise. If you're in an advisory board level, you have access to students. Get out there, see what they're learning, see what the schools are doing, see where you can help.
Yeah. I feel like that, that guest presenter role, popping in, giving some of your best stuff, getting a taste. That's the gateway drug. You do that.
Absolutely.
You're going to learn, you're going to feel good. And then if you feel the itch, I think then it's all right. How do I get more involved? Maybe I can get your perspective on this, because I've heard department chairs at construction management schools and colleges kind of voice their frustration is when openings come up, they will know that there's some really talented people who would be like you, Jared, yet they're forced to hire someone who's got a PhD, and they're going to know that they're probably going to get someone who doesn't have the real world experience, is going to be less helpful long-term to the students. And yet they're forced to do that. Maybe just give me a little context, and maybe our audience as well. When did that change? And is that driven by the research function, and generally research produces more dollars? My general rule of thumb is when I don't understand something is I say, all right, let's just follow the money. Sometimes it'll lead you wrong, but most cases it doesn't. How are those two distinct things, or are those combined to kind of create this challenge that many universities have right now?
I think that's part of it. I mean, a lot of universities are based off the premise of going back to liberal arts and sciences, where to become a master as an educator, you needed to go through and get a PhD. And I think that's trickled down. And I think there's a big disconnect. And I'll be honest, I think a lot of schools, they're scared of unfairness coming into play, where if some programs like liberal arts and science require a PhD, we need to make it so it's required in every other program that's part of our university. And I think that's honestly a part of it. And I've seen it the other way. I've seen in universities where people are looked down on when they don't have a PhD and they're teaching. And I think that's wrong in many aspects. I think there's avenues where PhDs are certainly needed, and I think there's avenues where they are not. And I think universities need to say to themselves, do we really need to require PhDs in this area if for specifically, completely understand, PhDs teaching master's degrees, teaching those who are going to become PhDs, 100%. I agree with that. That's that route and path. But if you have these boots on the ground students who are going into industries right after 4 years, not just in construction, but many other industries, why wouldn't you want people teaching those boots on the ground students exactly what it's like when they leave? And I think there's a big disconnect there. That helped Delhi. Everybody that was teaching at Delhi, including myself, we were all doing what I did. We were from industry, still in industry. And parents really loved that. when they knew their students were going to go there for 2 years or 4 years and get out and work, there was no questioning our degrees. It was questioning our experience. And I think it became a recruiting tool, and it still helps that school. And I think a lot of schools need to look at that. Like, we are having recruiting issues. We are having issues with bringing students in, and this could help. So,
yeah, students and young people in general are smart, and they know if I'm looking at you and you're my role model, I should be able to look at you and what you're teaching us and saying, yes, I want to have the experiences that you're describing out there building America, heavy highway, vertical, residential, whatever. Kids are smart if they're like, this person hasn't done that. Or maybe they did, maybe it was 20 years ago, or maybe they did, and it was a summer, within 9 consecutive years of schooling after they got out of college. Like, kids smart, and they can smell that. And that absolutely, I've seen it firsthand. I've been part of it. That absolutely influences the journeys that these students then take to either pursue that or take a different path. So I'm watching the time here, and I know you're busy. I want to ask you about risk. As you see on the job, one thing that I've heard from different folks kind of across the country is, and what we're monitoring is through COVID, when there was labor shortages, there was material shortages, the pendulum was shifting back the other way, and risk, which generally got shoved down owner to the GC, to the sub, to the suppliers, et cetera, down, has started being shoved back up, where some might say, where it belongs, with the owners. Are you seeing that shift now as we are not quite post-COVID, but we're headed that way? In certain markets, they're already seeing some recessionary economic behavior going on. Are you seeing that risk change, and how do you think about that?
Well, for sure. I mean, the biggest thing for risk with us in our industry and what we do is K through 12 construction is technically fast track construction, in the sense many of our projects, we need to be in the building and out of the building between, for us in New York, it's the end of June, almost the 4th of July, and out of the building by the end of August. So if you really look at that, we have 2 months. And I mean, a lot of schools with larger scale, obviously additions and large scale renovations, we swing spaces and we move things around, but a lot of renovated things, we want to get it done in 2 months. So the risk with right now, with what we know with material, it's already hands down, there's a major risk for the owner to take on a project and try to fast track it in 2 months, not knowing if material will actually show up. I'm sure everybody in the audience who's in this industry will know suppliers are telling you a ship date, and that ship date moves and it moves and it moves. So we don't really know that risk. So we're seeing a risk there. Another area where we see risk is the owner seeing that risk coming back to them is starting to lean back on the infamous LDs, liquidated damages. So now we're seeing liquidated damages want to be integrated more into contracts, which I don't blame them, but that's now trying to shift the risk back to the contractor. It's this push and pull battle, which in turn, it's a catch-22. Are you going to lose contractors from even bidding these projects because they know there's too much risk on a liquidated damage project? Do you see the owner taking a risk because if they don't do liquidated damages, they could see this job push out for 6 months? So that risk is there. Financial risk. I mean, we're seeing everything from materials being delayed for almost a year, I've seen, which is insane to even think about. It's like, how can simple things that only took a month or two be pushing to a year? We now have, in that time span, when you go that far, you have labor rates that change, especially if they're union. Prevailing wage rates in New York State can change and adjust. And with that, it's a contractor risk in the sense of, if that material comes in late, they may be paying more. It wasn't included in their bid. Can we go after the owner? The owner's scared of that risk of having to pay more money to have them stay late. So yes, I do see the trend going back to the owner, but I see the owners finding a way to push back to the contractor. And I can see why both want to push the risk.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And it's times that don't make sense. There's some of the things just, one day it's fine, and then the next day, the chip shortage that we hear about in vehicles, I had it happen with me. I got an IOU for a bunch of different things in my newer truck. That's happening. You wouldn't believe things that have a microchip in them, a processor chip, and everything's done, but we need the chip to get it sent to you, and that's going to be 6 months. It's It's crazy.
That is crazy. And just out of sheer curiosity, when you say that, my mind goes to, and I'm thinking of schools, I'm thinking of maintenance, I'm thinking of sensors and things like that, mainly on kind of MEP. What comes to mind when you say like a very specific example? And let's not get either of us in trouble. You don't have to tell me the actual project or whatever, the manufacturer, but like, what are you referring to when you say like, this is a current issue I'm dealing with or monitoring right now regarding that?
Mechanical equipment and electrical equipment is I'll be owning, and it doesn't matter what manufacturer right now. We're having to change our ways of, delivering projects. How are we going to do this? Do we phase this to 2 summers, bid it out so materials can get ordered, but we're not going to do it this summer. We know we're going to do it next summer, but we have to bid it now in order to get material ordered so it's on the ground in time to do it the following summer. So we're actually going through that with figuring out different delivery methods. How can we deal with this in a way that it is expected versus unexpected is our biggest issue right now, is breaking to an owner. We're going to have to split this project between 2 summers, and we can do this summer. These products are no problem. We'll get our flooring in. We'll get our ceilings in. We can do all of this. We can get the ductwork done inside, but we're going to have to wait for that mechanical equipment, or we're going to have to use your old mechanical equipment or your old unit ventilators. Something you don't have to worry about as much in Texas is heat. So a lot of heat but it's crazy. It's crazy. Generators. We had generators ordered for a school, and the generators will be in after 6 months, that's a long time in itself. But the transfer switches are another 6 months after the generators. So it's useless to get the generators when we can't even connect them to the building because of the microprocessors, the chips. It's crazy times.
It's easy for me to chuckle at just the absurdity, which I can only imagine at certain points you do too. But it's like, oh yeah, no generator, no problem. But what about the little thing I need in addition to the generator so it actually works? Oh yeah, that's going to be a problem. And it's like just challenging every assumption we have about traditionally how things have worked. It's just crazy. On that note, as we're kind of talking about suppliers, we have a large segment of our audience are somewhere on the supply side. Any advice for suppliers that maybe it's obvious, maybe it's not obvious, but you'd say at the top of my list in terms of the suppliers that continue to give us value, or the suppliers that we have said, as soon as we're able to, we're never working with these guys again. They're going on the blacklist. Any advice, good, bad, or otherwise, to the suppliers that are listening right now?
Just be 100% honest. It seems to be getting better. I did notice a trend of suppliers telling you we're going to ship it on this date, and then they kept moving it and kept moving it and kept moving it. And we have noticed a trend of suppliers just being brutally honest and saying, we don't know. We're hoping we're going to get this to you in 3 months or 4 months. That is so much easier than for us than continually going back to the owner and having to say, they said it shipped and it didn't. We're waiting to hear the next ship date. So be honest. And I know there are obviously issues that are going to arise that are going to push the ship date that you had no idea about. But if you know that you don't know, then tell us you don't know.
Well, guys are like, I know I'd like to, but then if I say that too often, I don't get the work. You're like, I know.
And yeah, well, exactly. And I get where they're coming from. They got to make sales still. And I completely understand. It's like that, like the thing in Miracle on 34th Street. When you see that movie where the Santa tells them where they could get it somewhere else cheaper, and the customers say, I'm not going to shop anywhere else because of your honesty. Maybe that'll work for you. I don't know.
Yes.
I don't know.
That I do believe, Jared, that is the first reference we have had to the Miracle on 34th Street in 300 plus episodes. So
just getting through Christmas, it's one of my wife's favorite movies. So
it is. It's a classic. You had mentioned before we flipped the mics on, obviously, how important in young people, in everybody, but we are talking in terms of students and young talent you guys are bringing on your team, how important people skills are. And I think we all realize this, flashing back to the earlier messaging I had about dropping my kid off to school and everybody has long hair covering their eyes and they're all staring at the phone and no one's talking to each other. I know that is just one little slice of the youth today, But as you think about people skills, that's a really broad umbrella, and that's going to mean different things to different folks in our audience. If you say, hey, people skills is really what's going to differentiate you in your career and us as an organization, where do you start? What's you say, hey, tip of the spear, the first thing we're going to start addressing with people skills to young people in construction is where?
Go work for some tips and see where that gets you. I know that was the start of my career, and I was very fortunate. I worked at a golf course when I was really young, and customer service. Basically, we called ourselves bag boys. We went out to the parking lot, golf bags, put them up on the carts, and the more personable you were, I noticed the more money that they would tip you. You know, they liked this guy. He talked to me. You know, and so I'm kidding in that sense, but I think it is great if you work in any kind of hospitality industry as a youth. I think you'll notice that those kids are a little bit more, you know, outgoing and you know, I think that's big. But I think we need to be teaching more people skills in K through 12 and in college. I think there's a severe lack of it. I personally integrated it into my project management classes as a large component because communication is key. Reading people, understanding, you know, going back to talking to administrators. And then when I get out of that office and I walk back into the building and I'm talking to the general contractor superintendent, you know, I have to change the way I'm communicating. And I think a professor I used to have that I co-taught a class with, he said, let's start mandating How to Win Friends and Influence People as a reading book. Mm-hmm. And that book is old, but it's still extremely valuable. And they have updated it with a better terminology, et cetera. But that was a start of making me realize, wow, we need to start talking to these kids about the importance of communication. And I told my students, I still tell a lot of those that work for us that work with me in our office and in our company, pick up the phone. It's amazing what the voice will do on the other end. Some people hate that and ignore that. Why are they calling me? Why aren't they just texting me? But it's amazing how much conversation can be saved by a phone call, if that makes any sense. I mean, you could see an email or text message go back for an hour when you could cover it in a 40-second phone call. So I encourage those to talk more, communicate more, teach the importance of communication face to face. I love it when our clients don't want to do phone calls or Zoom, even though Zoom is technically face to face like we are now. We have a lot of clients that love having in-person meetings, and I thoroughly enjoy that. I think that works better. It's tough, but I would encourage schools, specifically any academics in the construction management world, make sure that is integrated in the people skill portion. That's what makes successful construction managers, in my opinion, is the people skills and the ability to communicate.
Beyond Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, which this comes up often, and I was kind of mentioning it, but Dr. Heather Yates, who I believe you know at Oklahoma State,
yes,
she has made that part of their capstone. And that's where we kind of come in. So they also take our safety Spanish, but they take How to Win Friends. And so and it's a classic. I love reading it. And I think I would say in any generation, 400 years from now, if they're still listening to this, it's still going to be at how we relate to people. Right. And I think that book just kind of shows that, dude, human nature takes a really, really long time to change. So what worked in, the 1930s when that book came out, I believe, to today, showing an interest in other people and asking intelligent questions and taking notes and eye contact, all of that. And I would argue to my 15-year-old, I'm like, hey, if you can continue doing those things, you are going to differentiate yourself from other kids that are less comfortable doing that. Question for you, beyond leveraging the book as part of the class, are there other things that you did specifically to say, we're looking for behaviors, mental models around, again, people skills, communicating better, some really specific things you're able to do?
One thing for me that I told the students to try to do when they're on job sites that I personally do is get to know not just the superintendents and the foreman that you might be in communication with, get to know the trades. And so get out to the roach coach at break time. Mm-hmm. talk to the guys if they're working on something, be vested in what they're doing. Because I know personally, when I'm in this industry, I am so into the process of construction, the tools they're using, how they're doing it, the methods, that I will stop when I'm on a construction site and ask that tradesperson, what tool is that? Where'd you get that? Is that new? How's that work? And showing a vested interest in what they're doing in the field is, I think, creates this connection where I don't know how to explain it, but, a lot of white hard hats walk onto a construction site and a lot of tradespeople shake their head. And I like to tend to feel I don't get that attitude when I get on a construction site. I get tradespeople asking me how my kids are because they know me personally. So I would say, get to know everybody. I think that's one thing that severely lacks, is everybody's a team on a construction site. And I think people forget that. It goes from everybody at the bottom all the way up to us, all the way up to that administrator that's sitting at the desk. That's the owner at the school. We're all part of this machine. I had a colleague, Blaze from SUNY Delhi, who made a great analogy that I love to hear. We're all just a different gear in the machine of construction. Nobody's better than the other. And we need that tradesperson. We need that construction manager. We need that engineer. We need that architect. We need the owner. Nobody's better than the next. And we're all just a cog in the machine that makes the construction industry work. And I think with that means we can all talk to each other and act as peers and not superiors. So
yeah,
that's what I tried teaching the students a lot of. Don't ever look down on anybody in that industry, because you are all have a part to play.
Mm-hmm. Well, you bring up the roach coach, which is often, I think, underutilized tactic to build relationships. I'm like, for a while when I was young in my career, I didn't know anything. I didn't even know the questions to ask, and people knew that. And you're like, just another young kid. He's not going to be even helpful or useful here for another couple of years. I found though, $20 at a roach coach, maybe once every month, maybe once every 6 or 8 weeks, can change your relationship immediately. And then all of a sudden you get these guys pulling you and you're like, all right, you knucklehead, come here. Let me explain how this works. And you're like, oh, okay. Right. And that speeds your learning. And I was like, for what? I spent $100 a year at the roach coach. Done. Sign me up for that. It's easy. Right. All right. I got one more question. Something that you wanted to talk about. I grew up in Chicagoland area, Uniontown.
Yeah.
Was involved in construction, in contracts, and in purchasing during the Great Recession, when that city, especially on the residential side, totally flipped. It's fascinating to be part of. Talk to me just about kind of union engagement and where tech schools and 2-year degrees fall into. And I think this is probably not spoken about enough. And I think a little, you get on your soapbox for a minute. I think you can help people look around more constructively at what's happening locally.
So I was fortunate when I got into academia to be a part of where we met, the Associated Schools of Construction, and go to a lot of academic conferences where we had industry there, et cetera. I was a big part of NAHB. We got involved with the National Association of Home Builders and their help grants. We were a recipient when I was there. And so you'd get in the mix, and the conversations that kept being had and continue to be had are the lack of labor. I took a different route. I'm in the management side, but my job wouldn't exist unless we have that the tradespeople and labor. And I started seeing this just trend of labor saying you don't need college, and then the people that are obviously promoting college saying you need to go to college. You can't just leave high school and go to work. And this battle, I think, still ensues, and it ensues in the guidance offices at high schools. It ensues at home with the parents. And I think where there's a gap between the two, because let's face it, our 18-year-old from 1940 is totally different than our 18-year-old today. And I don't blame the 18-year-old from today saying I'm not ready to go work full tilt and start being an adult right after I walk across the stage at high school. And they want a taste of college. I think a big part of why a lot of people don't go into the trades after high school is they want to taste college. So working at a school that was mostly 2-year technical programs, and seeing the unions pleading, don't go to college, come straight work for us, become an apprentice. My theory is why aren't they communicating more? We have 2-year trade programs across this country that have hardly zero tie-ins with their local unions. And in my opinion, I think these unions are hurting for tradespeople, and the colleges are getting students in. And why aren't they communicating and working together to create this connection that's going to get students that can leave at 18, get a little bit more mature or immature, whichever way you want to look at it, and
yes,
have some fun for a few years while studying at school, and have it count towards apprenticeships, which some programs do that. The school I was at had somewhat of a tie with the local electrical union, but why isn't there more of that? And I think, that might get students a little bit more excited. I can go to college, but I can leave after only 2 years with little debt, and I could be making $70,000+ a year. And I got to commend tradespeople. They go to work, and at 3:30, they're done, and their focus is back home and on their family. That's a great job to have, and I think that's something that isn't expressed enough. I mean, obviously, some people think about work after, but in our side, management side, engineering side, business side, we're thinking about work 24/7. We're going home, we're writing emails still, we're doing things. Tradespeople have that luxury of potentially not having to worry about that. They need to worry about it when they pick up their tool the next day. And I think that's a huge value add, and that should be promoted more. And I think kids could have a great life. And I know a lot of tradespeople who are retiring extremely well and have had a great life with their families. And I just think unions need to promote more and work with colleges, specifically 2-year programs, to try to make that connection and promote it in a way that makes it lucrative for an 18-year-old.
Yeah. No, I think it's well said. I'm not going to add much on there. I'll just really say is, to even back it out further, is there's broad recognition of the lack of skilled craftsmen and where we get them from and how we produce them as a country. There's enough people. There's enough people here. We know that. The factor is it's marketing, it's operational, and I think my view is it's a leadership issue. We got to think differently, and we got to change the way things have been done for a long time. And there's a lot of interests that have been really successful over the years and been very profitable running things a certain way. But it's like, if we all look around and we say, this isn't really working well, all right, how do we change it? And I think your point there is well taken, is that includes unions, that includes 2-year degrees. This requires change in how we communicate the alternatives and options for young people. But it's something that our industry, we got to figure out. We got to move. We got to get better on it.
Absolutely. And there's money. I mean, it's only going to, if you're a craftsman and you're good at what you do, the sky's the limit right now, because people are willing to pay for that. And let's face it, money's a big part of a lot of people's lives. That's what drives us to go to college. That's what drives us to take that new job. And it's there in the trades. It's there, and we need them. And I encourage those listening, and with anybody that's youthful, and to start looking into them, because I don't think they're looked into enough.
That's great. I always like to end this podcast with a little note of capitalism at its finest. So there's always a profit motive. We can figure it out. All right, Jared. Hey, man, I know you're busy, and it was great to reconnect. I appreciate you allowing me to badger you for 6 years for you to kind of finally come on the show. I've learned a lot from you, and I appreciate your friendship, and thanks for coming on the show, man.
I appreciate you having me, and call me anytime.
Yeah.
I'm ready for a trip down south. So
got it.
Let's make it happen.
Let's do it.
All right, Bradley. Thanks so much.
All right, then, friends, how did that go? If you did enjoy this episode with Mr. Jared Yando, please rate and review this podcast. That means more to us than you know. We do want this podcast to be the best one that you listen to. So if you have suggestions for improvements, new topics, new guests, or maybe you want to leverage our asking for a friend, submitting a question directly to me, Bradley at BradleyHartmanandCo.com. Again, Bradley at BradleyHartmanandCo.com. And we will mull it over. we will do our best to provide a very anonymous but intelligent response to whatever situation you're struggling with. This episode is brought to you by the Simple Sales Pipeline. If you're interested in predicting and managing sales forecasts into the future in a very simple way that you can solve within 30 minutes, you will want to check out the Simple Sales Pipeline at thesimplesalespipeline.com. That's all I've got. Again, thank you for listening. We will close out with our leadership mantra. You, my friend, are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.